House Speaker Mike Johnson affirmed that Republicans remain resolved in their top two priorities. Number one, securing the border, and number two, controlling non-defense discretionary spending. Now, both priorities are going to be tested in the coming weeks as funding for the federal government expires and negotiations continue over border security and funding for Ukraine's war effort. Now, the backdrop to all of this is record-setting numbers of migrants illegally coming into the United States across the southern border. 302,000 in the month of December alone, the highest ever. Now, as Speaker Johnson pointed out yesterday, while he and over 60 of his House colleagues were on the border, the problem is so massive and affecting so many states and communities that every state is now a border state. Joining me now to discuss this situation and more on the border and how Republicans might force order into the chaos is Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He represents the 4th Congressional District of Louisiana. Speaker Johnson, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Hey, Tony. Great to be with you, as always.
All right. So, Mike, tell us about yesterday's border visit. What did you see? Anything new that came to the forefront of your observations?
Well, I'll tell you, it was an eye-opener. I mean, we've been acutely aware of the catastrophe at the border. Of course, for the last 3 years, the Biden administration, I came off the House Judiciary Committee that has partial oversight over the crisis. And, we've been highlighting this to the American people. But it really does make a difference to be there in person, on the ground, talking with the stakeholders, the patriotic, heroic Border Patrol officers and the sheriffs who are charged with keeping order down there. And there is no order, Tony. The border is completely open. This is my third trip to the border, but it was the largest congressional delegation that's ever made the trip. 64 House Republicans were there, representing 26 states and 1 U.S. territory. And what we saw was so alarming that it would just break the hearts of every American, and it would infuriate them as well.
I mean, I'm actually watching B-roll of your trip down there, and we see people right in front of your delegation walking across the water.
Oh, yeah, waving at us and shouting the names of their countries. They're Venezuela, and China and wherever else. They're coming from 170 countries around the globe because the Biden administration has laid out the welcome mat, and they sent the message that's loud and clear to everyone, everywhere. Come on in. There is no border. We don't have one. The Border Patrol agents have been converted into processing agents. They are literally operating processing centers, which, by the way, cost American taxpayers $1 million a day, not including the salaries of all the personnel there, to process illegals, bring them into the country, clean them up, give them clothing, and then all the resources they need. I mean, we're spending billions and billions of taxpayer dollars on the health care and the education and the housing and the recreation of people who are just flowing into our country illegally. Well, not to mention, Tony, all the human trafficking that's involved, all the fentanyl that's poisoning our streets of every city in America, and all the other societal ills that falls from it. This must stop.
Yeah, my daughter has been on the police force just a month, and already 2 fentanyl overdoses that she's dealt with, deaths related to that. Let me play a clip from Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas today on CBS. Play clip number 1.
Everyone agrees that the system is broken. And what we are doing is enforcing our laws. We are enforcing our laws, the criminal laws, our immigration laws, and that includes our asylum laws.
They're enforcing the law. How come there's chaos?
I want to be charitable in how I respond to this, Tony, but that man is lying to the American people. He's done it repeatedly under oath. It is so frustrating to us that the Secretary of Homeland Security, who helped engineer this catastrophe, is just blatantly saying things that are clearly, demonstrably untrue. From the very first day that President Biden took his occupation of the Oval Office, he started issuing executive orders. Among the very first things he did when he walked into the office 3 years ago is that he reversed the Remain in Mexico policy that had worked so well under the Trump administration,
right,
to stem the flow of illegals. They reinstituted catch and release. They have abused the asylum and parole systems. They've broken them completely, and that's why we have no system at all. Tony, the numbers are staggering. By Secretary Mayorkas' own count, We've had over 7 million illegal encounters at the border since they took office. Now, we know the number is probably twice that high that have actually come through, but 1.7 million known gotaways have evaded capture at the border, entered the country. We know that number it's actually a countless number because the border is not even being monitored in most places right now. We have at least 312 suspects on the terrorism watch list that were encountered at the border. Now, how many evaded capture and got in without being known or seen? I mean, they're setting up terrorist cells around the country. People are coming across the border in full military fatigue from adversarial nations. It's absolutely out of control, and Mayorkas and President Biden are personally responsible for it.
Well, let me ask you about that, because next week the Homeland Security Committee in the House is going to move forward with impeachment proceedings on Mayorkas. Where do you see that going?
We haven't impeached a cabinet secretary since the late 1800s, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I have been convinced that Mayorkas was committing impeachable a long, long time. I mean, he appeared a couple of times before my committee in the House Judiciary and just raised his hand, took the oath, and told us things that he knew when he was saying that were not true. I think they have engineered this chaos. I think these are deliberate policy choices that have created this catastrophe. And by the way, among the other ills that have been wrought on our society from this, remember that we are enriching these transnational criminal organizations every single day. The cartels are making billions and billions of dollars. They told us on the border in the Del Rio sector alone yesterday, the cartels said they think the cartels are making $32 million a week on human trafficking people into our country. Do the math. That's $1.6 billion annually in just one sector of the border to violent criminal cartels. It is unconscionable that the White House would go along with this, but they are empowering it with their policies.
Well, Speaker Johnson, the Biden administration, which, by the way, on Friday we reached a new record of national debt, $34 trillion. They're blaming their inability to secure the border on the House Republicans cutting funding. And I want to play a clip. This was this afternoon from the White House Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, earlier today, clip 9.
House Republicans decided to vote on a bill that would cut 2,000 Border Patrol agents at the border. That's what they did. That's what they did. And they continue to obstruct and get in the way of the president wanting to move forward with a supplemental that includes border security.
Your response, Mr. Speaker.
More madness from the White House. Of course, they will take an objective fact and turn it on its head. What the president is proposing is he wants millions and millions and millions of additional dollars, billions if he can get them, to process more illegals. They don't want the border to be patrolled. They don't want to stem the flow of illegals into our country. They want to send more of them and distribute them around the nation. That's what his proposal is for. We're not going to do that. We were with at dinner on Tuesday night. The deputy chief of the U.S. Border Patrol spoke very candidly before all the House Republicans. We were assembled there for a meal. And he said, I feel very much, let me give you an analogy. I feel very much as though I am, my job is to man an open fire hydrant. And he said, I don't need more buckets. I need them to turn the flow off. That's what we are aiming to do. And by the way, Tony, this could be done with a stroke of a pen. The president doesn't need new legislation to do this. He has every existing authority under federal law. He can make a decision right now, for example, to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. They estimate the officials, the sheriffs, the Border Patrol on the ground there, say that would stem the flow of illegals into our country by probably 70% overnight, because it would send a message around the world that you're not welcome to come in. You have to stay in Mexico while your case is adjudicated. That alone would do it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've been to the border twice during the Trump administration. One before they put the Remain in Mexico policy in place, and it was chaotic. I went back after that policy was in place, and it looked like a ghost town. It was no one coming across. It was working. The border was secure when the Biden administration came into office. But let's talk now about how. How will you force an administration to do something they don't want to do? You said this is by design. They're creating this chaos with their policies. They're lying about it. So how will the Republicans, with such a slim majority, how are you going to move forward with this?
We have to use every ounce of leverage that we can muster. We have the power of the purse. The president wants all this supplemental spending to send money, the precious treasure of U.S. taxpayers around the world to secure other borders elsewhere and do all these other things. And we've said if you want a national security supplemental spending package, it begins at our own border. We must take care of our own house first. And so I believe the public pressure is mounting on the White House. I think they're going to have to acknowledge they need a change. I mean, look at some of the most desperate pleas for change are the mayors and the governors of these deep blue states and cities, the sanctuary cities, that are being completely overrun by illegals now. There was a Fox News poll from about a week ago found that 8 in 10 voters think the situation at the southern border is either an emergency or a serious problem that should be addressed. I don't think they can turn a blind eye to this much longer, and we're going to continue to apply every degree of pressure that we can to do what the American people know what must be done.
So you've got the supplemental funding for Ukraine that the border issue has been attached to. What other must-pass pieces of legislation? I mean, we've got these appropriations bills. Those are looming, and we're coming up to the end of government funding. Is this going to factor into that discussion and whether or not the government continues to be funded?
Well, we have appropriation spending bills that we've been working to try to get through the process, to get back to regular order. You know how all that's developed over the last few months. Those things are on the table, as well as the supplemental spending measures for Ukraine and elsewhere. In some sense, all of this really is entangled together, because if we can't take care of our own safety, security, and sovereignty, it's very difficult for us to do much of anything else. That's the first job of the federal government, and that is exactly what's at stake. This is not hyperbole. I could tell you all day long, Tony, we could take a whole hour I could give you some highlights of some of the things we saw at that border yesterday, but among the most startling statistics is that 60 to 70% of the people who are crossing that border are single adult males, okay? They're between the ages of 20 and 40. These are not families in distress and widows who need asylum. These are young, able-bodied men coming from sometimes hostile foreign adversarial nations who are coming into our country to do only the Lord knows what. And we saw many of them with our own eyes in these processing facilities yesterday. This is madness. It's madness, and it must stop. It
really is. It's insane to let people in that you don't know what their intentions are toward the country. And again, we get lost in these numbers. The volume is so high. You said 7 million. Well, just in the first quarter alone of this new fiscal year, it was 785,000 migrant encounters. That's according to the federal government. Largest single quarter total ever. That's the equivalent of the size of in population to San Francisco, Seattle, Denver, Oklahoma City, Nashville. I mean, how are we absorbing these into the country?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think that we are very well, and you're starting to see the results of that on the streets of communities all across the country, which is why we've said, and you said at the outset of the program, every state is a border state now. On top of all that, on top of the security concern, just think about the humanitarian disaster that this is. Think about the unaccompanied minors who are trafficked across the border, sustaining only who knows what on the journey, right? They're disappearing into our country. The administration admits that it's lost track of almost 100,000 unaccompanied minors after they were released somewhere into the country. They're being swept up into trafficking rings and all the rest. I mean, we looked into the eyes of young children, unaccompanied, in these little processing centers just yesterday. They don't have, there's no belonging. They don't even know their real identities. They literally put stickers on their chest that they name them Jane Doe and John Doe because they don't even know who they are. Wow. I mean, the cartels are bringing these children across. They're dropping them into the razor wire entanglement so that the Border Patrol agents have to run to rescue the infants and young children, cut the razor wire, and leave a gaping hole for them to get through in places they weren't before. I mean, this is the disaster is just magnified over and over and over, and it's difficult to articulate how terrible and disastrous this is for all of us.
How in the world could that be defined as compassionate, having compassionate policies that lead to that type of exploitation, abuse to individuals, especially women and children?
How could anybody in good conscience, in any position of authority, understand that that's happening and turn the other way? These are unanswerable questions right now, Tony, and that's why we're demanding action from the White House. This is not who we are as a country. We stand for the rule of law, and certainly we stand for the humanity of all people who are made in God's image. And right now they're being trafficked and abused, and the White House seems not to care.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us today, giving us an update on your trip to the border. And obviously, we're going to be watching this very closely and carefully as it moves forward in your efforts to address the border issue. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, my friend. Talk to you soon.